Alright, hello! Welcome back to the fourth video in our Shadow Empire tutorial series. In this one, we're going to be talking about logistics. Now, up until this point, the series has been fairly surface level. We haven't really dove too deep into the deeper mechanics of the various systems. We just kind of glossed over them and talked a bit about how they worked, more or less just to get you guys an understanding of basically what you're looking at, what's going on around you, and what you can possibly do. That way you guys can just kind of dive around and click around and just kind of figure things out from there. But specifically with regards to logistics, I think what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a little bit of a deeper dive into it because I think it's super important. It's arguably the most important game system, so understanding it is super fundamental to playing Shadow Empire. Even if you understand all the other game systems, if you don't have your head wrapped around logistics properly, you're going to have problems as the game progresses, right? So everything hinges on it. You know, like if you don't know how the logistics works, you could struggle in the late game trying to figure out why are my units out of supply? Why are they not getting what they need? You know, why are my goods not flowing between my cities properly? So you really need to understand logistics. So in this case, we're going to dive a little bit deeper, take a look at some of the numbers, some of the mechanics, how things work under the hood. And I think with that foundation of solid logistics, I think the rest of the game will kind of come to you. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the various map modes related to logistics. We're going to be talking about action points and truck points and all that kind of stuff. We're going to be talking about the various logistical assets that produce these points. We're going to be talking about the different types of roads and how they differ for your logistical network. We're going to be talking about operational logistics, which is basically how your troops get their supplies in the field. We're going to be talking about the traffic signs mode, which is basically a tool where you can kind of optimize and prune and tweak your logistics network to make it smooth and efficient. And we'll also touch on airdrop logistics towards the end as well. Alright, so let's dive right into it. So first of all, what are logistics anyway? So logistics are essentially points that your logistical assets push out from your town along your road network to supply different assets along the road and also to supply your units in the field. They're incredibly important, and without shipping out your logistics, you do not have an empire. You don't have an army because they're all going to starve. You don't have an empire, it's all going to be cut off and just not going to work. So logistical assets create these points and they flow along roads out to assets and units. So let's take a look at some of the logistical map modes that we have. So if we make sure that we're on the middle tab on the right, you can see the different map modes and map layers and stuff. We're concerned right now with these map modes up here. We're going to go through them one by one, but not in this order. It's not super intuitive for a tutorial, so we're going to change the order up a little bit. The first one I want to talk about is the initial points mode. So if we click on that, it's going to show us basically how many logistical points our assets are sending out along our road network at the very start of the turn before anything uses any points. This is essentially the raw amount of logistics we're pushing out from our assets without any other considerations, right? Because you know, your units are going to use points, the assets along the way are going to use points if they need them, right? But this is just showing you just how much you're pushing out. So right now, you can see we got this kind of gray line going along our road network, and it says 400, right? That means we're pushing out 400 logistical points along this network. Where are those points coming from? Well, if we click on Polymer and go to Assets, we can see that we have a transport hub here. Again, this is a private asset. We have not nationalized this yet. You can see this transport hub level 1 is pushing out 400 logistical points, or 400 truck points specifically. You can also see that it's pushing out 500 action points, but we'll get to that in a minute. So the next map mode we want to look at is used points. We click that. But what you're seeing here basically is you can see there's a 6 along here. This means that there are 6 logistical points being used along this road. Well, what's using them, right? It's this guy here. This biker unit is using our 6 logistical points. If we hide the units real quick by pressing 1, you can see that there's a pull point here. So this hex is requesting 6 logistical points. Why? Because this guy, this biker, needs food. So he's requesting food from our Supreme Headquarters down here, and the amount of food he's requesting weighs roughly 6 logistical points. So he needs food, so the nearest node on the logistical network to him is this hex. So this hex essentially makes a request, hey, I need 6 logistical points over here to feed these guys. Then the SHQ ships out 6 logistical points worth of food to this hex to feed this guy, essentially. There's also, like, you know, ammo and fuel and all these other things, replacements and whatnot, but this guy hasn't spent any ammo, hasn't, you know what I mean? So for him, it's mostly, it's going to be basically food, maybe some fuel, but we haven't moved him recently, so he should be good on fuel. And if you look here, you might see these green dotted lines. It says 24 and 33 and 6 and all that. This is operational logistics. This is the units making requests of their nearest logistical connection, which in their case happens to be the SHQ. But we'll talk about operational logistics in just a minute. So let's move on to current points. So when we click current points, this is basically how many logistical points are left over. So yeah, as you remember, we had 400 being sent out initially, and then we had 6 of them used, in this case by this biker unit, and therefore there's 394 left. So this is basically how much is left over after all your various assets and your units take what they need from that particular line on the logistical network for their needs. So since these are leftover points, can we do anything with them? We sure can. So there's a few different things we can do with logistical points that are left over like this. The first thing we can do is we can move units strategically, right? Like any normal unit, like you can press M, as you know, you can just move around, right? This is just a normal move. This is how far this unit can move based on his action points. Or you can choose to strategically redeploy, and you can do that using the logistical network. So how does that work? If we click on our biker who is on the logistical network, obviously you can't strategically redeploy people who are not on the network. Now you can move them onto the network and then redeploy them if you like. But let's take a look at this biker, for example. So if we click him and we bring up his unit card here, we can see this number right beside his picture here. It says 81. This is the weight. This is how much this unit and all its subunits weigh in terms of logistical points. So we can move him as far as we want along the logistical network as long as we have at least 81 points left in the current points mode, right? So you can see we have 394, which means that if we press S to enter strategic move mode, we can move him all the way along the logistical network using logistical points. Have we moved him normally just with the M key, like we can just move him within his action point range, and because this is just such a tiny stretch of road, it doesn't make sense to do that. It'd just be better to use his action points. But strategic move, you can move him like all the way across the map if you want. As long as you have the road network to support it and enough logistical points to support it, you can basically teleport people back and forth across the map. Now granted, that's not always a realistic scenario, but hypothetically, if you've got the logistics network to support it, you can absolutely do it. So if we press S to put him into strategic move mode, we can see we can move him along any one of these hexes because they all have at least 81 points on them. So just for the sake of demonstration, let's move him to here and see what happens, right? So we'll click, move him here, and now if you look, these 3 hexes still have their 394, but these 3 that we moved him on only have 313 because he weighs 81, and therefore when we moved him from here to here, it consumed 81 points along this stretch of road. So that's how you can kind of strategically redeploy units across a large logistical network, and you'll find yourself doing this because maybe you're done with one particular front of the war and you want to move them around, or maybe you want to send them back to the SHQ and refit them, or whatever you want to do. There's any number of reasons why you want to strategically redeploy, or just to get into position quicker, right? Like produce stuff, get it out there, right? So strategically redeploying things is a really handy tool. And there's also something else we can do with leftover logistical points. So quite often you're going to find yourself raising new army formations inside of your SHQ. And the reason this is a handy thing to do is because logistics are not an issue in your SHQ, right? Because they're not shipping anything. All the supplies are physically right there. You don't need to ship anything anywhere. But once in a while, you're going to want to raise troops directly in the field, just for simplicity and speed's sake, right? Rather than build a new unit at your SHQ and then ship them to the front. Wouldn't it be quicker and simpler just to click on the front and raise them there? Well, you can do that. So you can raise units along any road network or rail network or whatever, anywhere where you have enough logistical points to raise the unit. So let's say, for example, we wanted to raise a unit right here on this hex, right? We could do that. We could say raise formation. Let's say we wanted a machine gun, right? So it lists all the different items and things that we need, including the logistical cost. So we need 125 logistical points to raise him on this hex, and we have 394. Let's take a look. Where's that coming from? Well, as you see, we have 394 here. And again, if we clicked here and we tried to raise it here, you would see we need 125 and we have 313 again because we have 313 on this hex. But there's an interesting caveat to that. Let's demonstrate real quick. If I click on this guy here, I'm going to strategic move him into Mopiend for the sole purpose of burning some of the logistical points in Mopiend. So let's watch that. So move him back again. So now we're down to 214 because I strategically moved him out and I strategically moved him back down there. I just wanted to burn the points, and that's the only reason I did that. So let's click this hex, for example, the one that's 394 on it. We'll say raise formation. We'll get our machine gun. And then under logistics section, it says we need 125 and we have 214. Wait a minute. The hex says we have 394. Why does the logistics pop-up say we only have 214? Well, that's because this hex here only has 214. Think of raising units in the field, like producing them in the Supreme Headquarters and then shipping them out to the front, because that's essentially what you're doing, right? It's just a shortcut from clicking here, building them, and then strategic moving them out to the hex. It's a shortcut, but it is functionally identical. You're producing them in the SHQ, and you are shipping them to the hex that you specified. So let's look at a different type, for example. Let's try and raise something else. Let's look at like a buggy or something, right? So if we click the buggy, we can see, oh look, we need 225, but we only have 214. We cannot raise a buggy here, even though it says 394, because a buggy needs 225 logistical points to ship. That's its weight. But we can't ship a 225 weight unit from here to here because there's a bottleneck. This particular area only has 214 logistical points, you see? So you need the requisite amount of logistical points all the way from your SHQ to where you're deploying. So we could not deploy a buggy here even though it's only 225 points or whatever, right? And we have 394. This is a bottleneck because of that. So instead, what we could do is we could raise a machine gun. 125 out of 214, right? So when we go ahead and raise this, as you see, it's going to subtract 125 from both of these hexes, but nothing from up here because we didn't go that far. We shipped it from here to here. So that's a very important concept to understand as to why you can't always raise formations in certain areas. It's always coming from the Supreme headquarters. So even if you have logistics from another city coming out to here, making it enough, that doesn't count. It needs a connection to the Supreme headquarters. And that is such a key concept to get your head around. Another thing you can do with leftover logistical points is you can transfer items and even people between your zones. And the reason you might want to do this is because of how construction works in Shadow Empire. So as we touched on in a previous video, what a zone does when it's constructing an asset is it takes the materials for that construction out of its own stockpiles. And if it doesn't have enough of those materials in its stockpiles, it's going to request those materials from the SHQ at the start of the turn. And this is going to clog up your logistics network, right? So if you're building something that, say, for example, needs a lot of metal, right? And the town you're building it in doesn't produce its metal, well, that means it's going to have to request metal to be sent to it at the start of a turn. So rather than do that, what you could do is you could use your leftover points this turn to preemptively send a whole bunch of metal to that zone. That way it has lots in stock next turn to build the asset, and it doesn't have to make requests and clog up the logistical network next turn. So how do we do that? Let's say, for example, we want to build something in shelter, or we just want, more stuff or more metal or something in shelter. So what we can do is we can click on shelter and we can say transfer right here. And what you're presented with here is a list of all your zones and your SHQ. So you can basically say, I want to transfer from my SHQ to the zone, right? Or you want to transfer from the zone to an SHQ. So in this case, let's say we want to transfer metal to 5 top. So we would say SHQ to zone. We'd find the 5 top row in this list here. We would say SHQ to zone. And then, okay, we want to transfer metal, right? So we have 9469 metal in the SHQ. And as we recall, that's a different stockpile from the zone. That's not my capital stockpile. That's the SHQ stockpile. So we're going to transfer metal this turn directly from the SHQ stockpile into 5 Top's own city stockpiles. That way they can build something next turn without calling on the logistical network. So let's transfer whatever, 5,000 metal more or less, right? We'll transfer that. 5,000 metal for 5,000 logistical points, right? So we hit transfer.
Yes.
Transferred 5,200 metal to 5 Top. Now if we go to 5 Top's items, we can see that it has 5,200 metal in stock now. Now this isn't in the SHQ, this is literally in 5 Top's actual stockpiles. So when they go to build something next turn, they're going to have plenty of metal to do it without making any requests of our logistical network and clogging it up. Alright, so next let's take a look at the preview points mode. So if we click on that, you're going to get a purple line here. Again, in our case, it shows 400. So this preview points mode is essentially saying this is what we expect to happen next turn at the start of the turn, right? So this is essentially next turn's initial point mode. According to the game, it figures next turn we're going to send out another 400 logistical points. And that's because we haven't upgraded the transport hub or whatever. Let's nationalize the transport hub and I'll show you what I mean. So if we click this and we click nationalize, right? We now have a truck station, but it's already built, right? It's finished. It's considered, quote, finished this turn. So a truck station 1 produces 800 truck points. But this isn't going to go into effect until next turn. It's also an indicator of where your logistical points are going in terms of direction. So right now we only have one road, but if we were to build another road here, let's do that. Let's build a road out here just for the sake of argument. We'll spend 48 IP to build a road here. Now if we turn off our preview point mode and we turn it back on, you can say, oh look, now it's shipping 218 points out this way and 182 points out this way. So the game splits up logistical points into directions. So if you have 400, it can only send so many in each direction, right? And it'll try and prioritize based on what's in what direction. just to make sure that everybody gets what they need. So you remember we talked about pull points in the initial points mode? You can see there's more pull points here. You can see this particular hex is asking for 20 points, and this particular hex is asking for 22 points, because next turn it's going to need points to kind of feed these guys. And lastly, let's take a look at the bottlenecks mode. This is a pretty important mode to understand as well. So this is basically showing you kind of a relationship between your used points and your initial points. So if we look at it real quick, we can see we have 22% in red, 67% in yellow, and 78% in green. This basically means along this stretch of road, we have 78% of our initial points remaining in the form of current points, right? We have most of them left. Down here, we have, 67%. And along this particular stretch of road, where we were strat moving the guy back and forth just to burn points, we only have 22% of our initial points remaining in the form of current points, right? So most of our things are used up in this stretch. So when you look at your bottleneck mode, you might think, well, red, that's really bad, right? And yellow, maybe that's not great. Green looks good. And that's basically true. But what you have to remember about this is, this just means you've used most of your points, but you have 22% of the points left over. So that means that in terms of logistics, all of your assets got what they need, assuming your SHQ had the products they needed. All of your troops along this route out here got what they needed, again assuming your SHQ had the goods in store. So, but from a logistical standpoint, you had enough trucks to ship what you were trying to ship, essentially. So as long as you don't see black here, then you're pretty much good to go. You can always improve this, but basically you're looking for black. Black means 100% of your points are used and you have none left, which means somebody probably didn't get something they were asking for, right? Because if you're sending out 400 points exactly, what are the odds that your actual complete necessity was exactly 400 points worth of consumption, right? The odds are extremely remote. So what that means when you see black is that all of your points were used and probably more points were needed, you just didn't have them, right? So when you see black, what's the solution, right? Well, the solution is to upgrade your logistical assets. So right now we have a transport hub producing 400 points. Let's say that wasn't enough, and it kind of isn't right now. We could go ahead and nationalize this and turn it into a proper truck station. So now we've nationalized this into a truck station, but you can see it's still producing 400 points because it's still this turn. But next turn, once it's gone into effect, it's going to start producing 800 truck points. It's also going to produce more action points. You see we only have 50 action points right now, but this is going to give us 100 action points. What the heck are action points? So if we click on this guy here as an example, we can see that he has 100 action points. This is this little circular arrow thingy. So action points are spent to move into new hexes. So if we click on him and we kind of move our mouse around, you can see based on his current level of action points and the current terrain around him, the game is saying all these highlighted hexes, these are the hexes that he could potentially move into based on his action points and the terrain. And if you look in the bottom right, you can see move mode AP, right? Kind of changing as I move my mouse around. So you can see like 55 AP to move here, 80 AP to move here, and so on, right? So it basically costs him a certain amount of action points to move around. So like if you move him here for 55 AP, he's got 100 now, we can see now it's down to 45, right? Pretty simple. Or like this guy here, for example, right? Maybe he wants to move into here, it's 25 AP, right? Well, where's this number coming from? Well, let's take a look real quick. So if we click on this hex here we want to move into with this guy here, if we hover our mouse over here, you can see the costs at the bottom there where it says move type. So that's all the different move types in the game, different vehicles and different, ways of locomotion have different costs for moving into different hex types. And this lists them all. So you can see foot moving into this takes 25 AP. And these guys are on foot. And therefore, if we move into this hex, it's going to cost 25 AP. And so the game's essentially just adding up all these numbers and totaling them to get our action point cost to move. And when it comes to trucks and logistics and things, it works the exact same way. So if we look at this hex, for example, this is the hex that has the road on it, as you can see. If we hover over this now, you can see there's a new column because there's a road here, right? So now if you look, for a foot guy to move into this, it's still 25 just as it was without the road. But if you look at wheel, which is trucks, right? Trucks or buggies or things, it's only 10. So it only costs 10 action points for a wheeled unit to enter that hex. And if you look a little bit further down, it says truck logistics. Again, truck logistics is 10 to enter this hex because it has a road. If we take all that and we say, okay, well, our asset is producing 50 action points, and they flow along the road just like the logistical points do. If it's producing 50 action points for the trucks, and it's 10 action points on these road hexes, well, that stands to reason that our truck logistics can go 5 hexes before they start to sort of peter out. So the way it works is You can go your maximum distance based on your action points, but once your action points run out, the amount of logistical points starts to peter off. Like, you can still go further than your action points, but the amount of logistics you can send kind of drops off sharply every hex until it eventually vanishes completely. And of course, as you can see, higher level truck stations produce not only more truck points, but more action points as well, so they can go a little bit farther. Now, I've loaded up another save game just to kind of show you a little bit more with regards to different types of roads. So you can see here we have sealed roads, right? These are properly sealed versus these dirt ones here. So if we look here, we hover over, we can see that these have slightly reduced costs, right? So wheel is going to be 8, if you see there. So it's only going to cost like a buggy 8 to move through there. Versus if you look down to truck logistics, you can see that on the road, it's only going to cost 7 points. So instead of 10 points for a dirt road, it only costs 7 points, right? So that can extend its range by a couple hexes, right? So you can see that sealed roads are slightly more efficient than dirt roads, which makes sense as far as how far the trucks can go on them. And if we click this hex, for instance, we can see that truck logistics is still 7 because there is still a sealed road for it to drive on, but there's also a rail line. You see, there's some railroad tracks running through this hex as well. So if you go a little bit further down, you can see rail logistics on the road is only 4 action points. So it's only going to cost rail logistics 4 IP to get through these hexes, which is way more efficient. And if we look at our rail station, just for the sake of demonstration, this rail station is producing 130 action points. And it goes all the way up to 160. And you can even go to high-speed rail, which goes even further. So you can kind of see the value of upgrading your roads to sealed, getting rail logistics. It just goes so much further, and you can ship so much more goods. And there's another small nuance I wanted to cover real quick as well. So again, you remember this guy was only taking 25 AP to go here, whatever. But this is just basic infantry, right? This guy, to move in here, costs 30 AP, right? So where's that number coming from? If we look on this thing here, you can see that for foot, it only costs 25. So why is it costing us 30 AP to move in here? Well, that's because we have different unit types. We have this irregular artillery, right? So artillery is really slow. So let's take a look at this. And of course, you move at the speed of your slowest unit, right? So if you click at this, you can see, oh look, artillery is 50 action points to move into that hex. But wait a minute, it was only 30. So where's the 30 coming from? Well, in this case, there's trucks. So this artillery is towed by these trucks. And trucks are wheeled, and wheel, as you see here, is 30. So the trucks are actually towing the artillery, so we don't get penalized with the 50 AP cost of the artillery. So that's how this works when you're looking at, units that have mixed unit types. It's going to move at the speed of its slowest unit, and as long as you have enough trucks to carry everything, right? So the trucks are gonna tow the artillery and such. Now, hypothetically, if we got into combat and these trucks were destroyed, then these artillery pieces would have no one to tow them, and therefore we'd be back down to that 50 AP, and it would be much harder to move around. All right, let's take a minute to talk a little bit about the different logistical assets. So if we click on Polymer and we go to Construct, there's a bunch of different things you can create. And it's not just your truck stations, right? So your truck stations are obviously in here. These are the stations that produce, of course, your truck points, your action points. So as you upgrade these truck stations, you're going to be able to push more logistics out. You're going to be able to push them farther. You also have rail stations, which post out a lot more logistical points, and they push them out a lot farther, as you saw from those action point calculations before. So these are really great in the later games. This is really good, I find, for connecting cities together. Like, I tend to use roads for, maybe branching out to assets, right? Like if I have an oil derrick or like a metal mine, I'll send like a sealed road out to that to collect it. But I tend to like to connect my different cities via rail. So this is actually quite helpful for that, just to make sure that there's tons of logistics between your cities and there's no issues getting things back and forth from your SHQs to your SHQs and all that kind of stuff. A railhead is a really, really important asset. So as you can see, a rail station's kind of expensive, right? That's a little bit prohibitive. I mean, by the time you hit the mid-game, this isn't too bad. You can pretty much afford this, but you don't want to be building rail stations, ideally, in every single one of your cities. So what a railhead does, it doesn't send out any logistics, but it allows a rail line to kind of stop, if that makes sense. Rail logistics works a little bit different from road, in that you can just run a road through an asset and that's fine. As long as there's logistical points along that asset, the asset will get what it needs from the logistics. Versus if you just run a rail line through an asset, it's not going to get all the logistical points that the line potentially could provide, because it has nowhere to unload. Like you can stop trucks on the road and go grab grab stuff for them. You can't, they're not going to stop a train in the middle of the tracks and try and unload it. Like, you need a spot to unload a train. So that's what a railhead is. It's a very cheap, very quick to build thing that you build at the end of a rail line, and that allows the logistics to flow all the way out to the end of that line properly. If you don't have a railhead at the other end of the line, you're not going to have much logistics along that line, but when you build that railhead, it's going to complete the connection. So ideally what you might want is maybe a high-level rail station in your SHQ, and then you'd want like railheads in all your satellite cities. That way your rail network can get all the way out there, because if you don't build those railheads, it's not going to work. And supply bases are also really, really important. I want to talk about supply bases as well. So what a supply base does, it essentially extends the action points along a truck-based logistical line. But only once per line. You can't put like a bunch of supply bases in a row. That's not going to work. But like once per line, you can basically do it. So what it does is it takes whatever action points there are left on a particular hex and basically adds, in this case, a level 1, it adds 50. So what can you do with that? Well, if you remember our example from before, right, about how our truck station produced, as an example, 50 action points. So we can go 5 hexes, right, because as you remember, it's 10 AP on these dirt roads. So if you were to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it's going to start dropping off here, if we were to put a supply base here, it would then extend the range of that basically another 5 hexes. So we'd be able to go quite a bit farther before our logistics were to run out. So on these dirt roads in the early game, it's very, very effective, because you can dramatically increase the range of your logistical network. But there is a small kind of caveat to remember with this. So as you recall, when we looked at the other example, the sealed roads cost less AP to move on with your logistics, and therefore it can extend longer. So you might think, well, so if my sealed road network lets my logistics extend out to, say, whatever it is, maybe 8 hexes instead of 5, well, maybe I'll just put my supply hub 8 hexes away, right? And that would make sense, except for one small detail, which is called admin strain. So we touched on this in one of the previous videos. So if we click on Polymer, and then we click on regular capital zone, you can see we have no admin strain. Admin strain, as we touched on before, is basically a production penalty. Once it gets to 10%, that's going to start lowering production of your assets. And admin strain is produced when you build assets in a zone that are more than 6 hexes away from the zone capital, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We could build as far as here without incurring admin strain, but if we start building farther out, like once we get the zone, of course, because we can't build outside of our zone, but if we, like, let's say we owned all this territory, right? If we build an asset farther than 6 hexes away from our zone, we're going to start incurring admin strain, which means all the production in the zone is going to start going down. It's slow, but it adds up. So what do? So if you're running a sealed road, that's going to extend the range beyond that 6 hex restriction, which means if you build the supply base inside that 6 hex, you're essentially wasting a couple of hexes. You could have built it a little bit farther out and thus extended it even farther, right? But there's another factor to consider. As we recall, when we're looking at construct and we look at our logistics, if we look at the supply base, we can see that if we upgrade it, it goes to 75. And if we upgrade it again, it goes to 100. So while building the supply base within the 6 hex range for the admin strain might be essentially wasting a few hexes of potential logistics range, by the time you upgrade it to level 3, you're looking at 100 AP extension, which is going to send it way down the road. And then you can get a really, really nice extension without having to worry about admin strain. Now, of course, you can always take the admin strain, but personally, I don't do that. I wouldn't recommend it. If you're looking at logistics of that range, at that point, you start using rail logistics. It makes a lot more sense. All right, let's talk briefly about operational logistics. So what's that? Let's go to our used points mode where we were before. So in addition to the used points along the road, we have these dotted green lines here. What does that mean? So this is the unit's operational logistics. This is how units get their supply when they're in the field. So what they're going to do is they're going to try and get their supply from the node along the supply line, which is the closest to them in terms of action points, right? So what is the closest for them to get? So in this case, this guy's taking this route to go get them from Polymer. This guy's coming down here to get his logistics from Polymer. So the road network doesn't need to extend exactly to every hex that your unit is on. They can gather supplies at a range, and again, this is all based on action points. So obviously it's going to be harder to gather supplies through mountains than it is across plains and things like that, right? So what this is basically representing is while this unit isn't actually moving, he is sending runners out here to grab supplies from the SHQ and bring it back to him every turn. So for these 4 units here, it just so happens that the closest node for them in terms of action points just so happens to be the SHQ in this case. It would work the same if they were positioned up here, right? So like, as you recall, this bite guy, he was over here. The closest node for him on the logistical network would have been this hex here, which is why this hex here is calling for 6 points. Now this guy moved, which is why it's not there anymore. And this guy moved this turn, which is why he's not there. This is why it's showing it down here. But you see, kind of see how this works. Like they travel along these paths to grab their supplies from where they need it. Green just basically means it's a healthy connection. He's not struggling to get it. Alright, so for the sake of demonstration, why don't we move these 2 guys way out here just to see what happens to their logistical situation. And we'll advance the turn and see what happens. Alright, so we are in the next turn. The enemy has advanced on us a little bit. We don't care about that. Basically, yeah, so you can see what's happened here. So these guys have moved farther out, and you can see kind of what's happened here. So as we go out further, you can see the line starts to get yellow, and then it turns blue, right? That means he's starting to run out of his range. So he's still picking up his logistics. He's still getting logistics. He's still picking it up from Polymer, but it's starting to get a little bit difficult for him. And also you can see here in the bottom left corner of these unit counters, this little square is yellow, whereas these guys have a green square. This is an indication of how much of the supply that they requested that they actually received. So let's see what's going on here. If we click at this guy, and we click down here in this little barrel in the bottom right here, this is his supply. This talks about how much he requested versus how much he received. So as you can see here, we have a bit of a problem. This unit requested 2 units of fuel, and he only received 1, right? Because he's got these trucks. So why did he only receive 1? Well, you see, there's a pickup issue here. It tells you exactly what happened. If our SHQ was missing the fuel, it would say that. It would say SHQ missing items, but it doesn't say that. We got fuel. We still got fuel. So there was a pickup issue. Because of the extreme distance here, and the fact that we're starting to run out of our logistical range, we weren't able to pick up all the fuel we wanted. Same thing over here. You can kind of see it's going green, and then yellow, and then blue. So he's got a wicked pickup issue here. So you can see he requested 8 fuel, and he only got 4. So this is just because of the range and the distance. And there's actually kind of a map mode we can check out for that. Show operational logistics, or if you press 6. So now you can see the kind of range of the operational logistics based on the terrain surrounding the supply point, right? So the green basically means you should have no problem getting all your stuff. Obviously yellow a little bit less, blue a little bit less, red even less, and then the color runs out and you just get no supply. So these guys are in dangerous territory. They're not getting all of their supply, as you can clearly see. So what do we do about this? Well, if we want to keep pushing out further, we need to extend our road network out towards these guys. That way we can push supplies out to them. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's extend the road out a little bit this way. We'll just push it out a little bit this way. And then we'll also extend a road a little bit out towards this guy as well. Like that. What that's going to do, that's going to allow the supply to flow directly out a little bit farther. That way he's going to be pulling from this hex. This guy will be pulling from this hex. And this guy will be pulling from this hex, instead of going all the way to the SHQ. And this is also one of the really, really valuable things about the preview map mode. So now that we've built that road, if we go to the preview mode with P, now you can see we have logistics flowing out as of next turn. This is next turn's initial points. So the game is predicting that we're going to send 269 this way, 271 this way, and then 260 this way, right? But there's a trick. So you can combine the preview points mode with the operational logistics map mode, these colors here. So these colors here are representative of this turn's logistics. But if we turn the mode off and then turn it back on, now you can see it's updated to reflect these new values. So now you can see both of these units will be in supply next turn. In other words, the operational logistics should extend all the way out to them at full efficiency in the following turn, which means you can move your troops around and they'll be perfectly well in supply. So this all being in green means that the operational logistics being projected by these logistical points on the road should extend to them in the next turn, and they should be in full supply next turn, assuming they don't get cut off. So I like to use this when I'm busy attacking or when I'm moving into enemy territory. That way I know which hexes will be in supply next turn, so that I can move my units into them this turn and be safe, because supply is calculated at the start of the turn. So as long as at the start of next turn your units are in supply, then they will get their supplies. And this is telling us that at the start of next turn, because we're using the preview mode here, at the start of next turn, these units will be in supply. If we go back to current mode, and then we refresh our operational logistics, you can see that this turn, this guy is out of supply. So you might have thought, oh, we moved him out of supply. But again, if we look at the next turn, which is preview points, and then we refresh our operational logistics mode by tapping 6 twice, you can see at the start of next turn, these guys will be in supply, and therefore they should receive everything they need as long as we have it. So that's a really, really handy tool when you're conducting operations into enemy territory, when you're advancing, just to get an idea of whether your road has extended far enough, whether your logistics are extending far enough. This way you don't outrun your supply and get your guys killed. So here's an example of using your operational logistics map mode in conjunction with your preview points mode in order to plan your moves this turn for your different units. So you can see we're using preview points right now, and you can see what our supply is going to look like next turn. So you can see that these guys are actually out of supply, but I want to keep moving forward. But it's like, how do I know who's going to be in supply next turn? I don't want my guys to be out of supply and all that stuff. So here's what I would generally do. In this case, I would extend the road out this way, right? I would do this. Then I could even just be fancy and block this off, because we don't need that right now. So now we see we got logistics coming down this way. If I double tap 6, now it's showing me next turn these hexes will be in supply. So now I know I'm safe to move these guys up, right? If I want to move them farther up, I could do that. Same thing here. Let's say I wanted to move this machine gun. I could put a road down here, whatever, and then refresh my preview and then refresh my operational logistics. Now it's saying, hey, this hex is going to be in supply next turn, so I'm free to move him there. I can keep moving him. See how he's still in supply? So that's what I like to do when I'm invading an enemy. I like to keep using this preview point mode in conjunction with the operational logistics map mode, just to see what the effects are going to be, so I know which hexes are safe to move into in the following turn, and you just kind of keep extending your logistics out with roads that way. Alright, so let's talk about traffic signs and optimizing our logistics network. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to build a road here. I'm just going to build a bit of a branch here, just for the ability to show this. And of course, we can do preview again to refresh what it's going to look like next turn. So the game is telling us next turn logistics are going to flow this way, 269 are going to come up here, and then they're going to branch out like this, 144 over here and 124 over here. So traffic signs are a way that you can kind of manipulate how this works. So there's a traffic sign order here on the right, or you can just right click on the hex and go traffic signs. And then once you click, you end up in this screen. So what the heck are we looking at? So this is a zoomed in picture of the hex as of next turn, and I highly recommend using this mode in conjunction with the preview mode so you can see what's going to happen next turn. So using traffic signs, we can actually block logistics to certain directions. So as you see, we have our logistics coming in this way, and they're branching off both ways. Let's say we wanted to block all traffic going this way, right? And we wanted to send everything up north. If you click this sign up here, we can say click all. Now it puts this, basically puts a stop sign here. It says nothing can come this way and everything must be redirected this way. So if we go up back here, we can see now this traffic sign is blocking anything from going this way. And now all the logistics are going up this way. And if we refresh our operational logistics, you can see that change has now put this particular hex in slightly less supply. This guy's still getting his supply because he's still in range, but you can see what that did. We diverted the logistical points up this way, and therefore they're 1 hex short of coming this way, which meant we just lost 1 hex of logistics over here, you see? So the range has been cut off, so we're diverting everything up this way. We can also do the opposite. If we want to get rid of that, we can block them up this way, and now all the logistics are going to the west, and thus we're not getting as many logistics up here. So once your road network gets large and complicated towards the later game, you can start doing this to make sure that the logistics are going exactly where you need them. Alternatively, you can just do a little bit here and a little bit there. So you can say I want to block 20% of logistics that way and maybe 40% of logistics that way, and it'll do its best to kind of redirect things based on what you want here. And this is helpful for when you have old roads that you don't need anymore, and you don't want to spend the material cost to delete them. So for example, if we go into construct road mode, right, and we say demolish infra, we're going to have to spend 5 IP per hex to destroy this road. Maybe we're short on IP, we don't want to do that. We only have 20, right? So that's not great. So maybe we figure, well, we've got logistics coming up this way for this guy on this road. We don't need this road, so we can just block it, right? Traffic sign, block all logistics this way. Now everything's going to get sent to the west for this truck guy, so when we refresh that, now we have our logistics back. Quite often when you finish up with a war, or when you're done in one particular area of operations, you're not going to need those roads anymore, so it's a good idea to block them off. That way you're not wasting your logistical points, that way they're all flowing to where they need to go. Another use is when you're just sending too many points to a particular area. So a perfect example is this hex right here. You can see there's a pull point on this hex. These purple boxes in the preview mode, these are pull points. This is saying that this hex is requesting 20 logistical points in order to feed units nearby, namely this guy right here, right? But you see, he's requesting 20 logistical points, but we're sending this hex 269. That's way more than we need, and we could be using those logistical points elsewhere if we only send what we need up here. So how do we do that? What we can do at our SHQ, at the next kind of branch, you can only do traffic signs at branches. They won't do anything just on straight sections of road, but wherever the road forks, you can do a traffic sign. So back here at Polymer, we can say traffic signs, and what we can do is we can block all logistics in this direction. You see how it cuts it off? But these are the things that the traffic sign applies to. So right now the traffic sign applies to truck logistics, rail logistics, and pull points. So what we can do is if we uncheck this, we're going to block everything. We're going to block all truck logistics and rail logistics, but we're going to make an exception. We're going to allow pull points to get through, right? So now you can see we have a little bit of logistics going this way. So now you can see we're only sending 20 up this way, and thus saving the rest for other places that they're needed, like over here. And that's really, really important. You don't want to waste logistical points. And the same thing goes for assets. Like, let's say we had an asset on this hex that needed like maybe 100 logistical points, and we're sending it 395. Well, again, that's wasteful, right? We could be using those logistical points elsewhere. So again, let's say there was an asset here requesting 22. Again, we can go down here to the next branch, go to traffic signs, and then block all logistics, but then allow pull points, right? As you can see, we're allowing pull points. So now only the 22 we need are being sent that way, thus freeing up the rest of our logistical points to go wherever else they're needed, right? So that's a really, really handy tool you can use to make sure your logistics are going exactly where they need. And another thing you can actually do is you can create your own custom pull points. So let's just simulate something. Let's pretend, right? So let's put an asset right here. Let's pretend. So what we'll do is we'll go into traffic signs, and we're going to create a custom pull point. So let's pretend like there's an asset. Let's do a custom pull point. So we're going to say, regardless of what's going on, I want to deliberately pull 100 points onto this hex for whatever reason, just in case. So we'll click this, and now you can see this hex wants to pull 100 points, but we're blocking it here. So let's let pull points through, and now you can see 100 logistical points next turn are going to end up on this hex because we made a custom pull point. So sometimes the logistics system doesn't always seem to do what you think it's going to do, and it's usually just a case of messing with your traffic signs. But if you're really not sure and you really want to force it, you can do a custom pull point just like that, and that'll force logistics up here, assuming of course you have enough to send that way. So another aspect of the traffic signs mode is these logs here. So these logs on the top right, it looks a little bit cryptic at first, but basically what this is saying is at the start of this turn, we received 400 truck points from the southwest, and at this point this is the 10 out of 50 action points that you recall were produced by our transport hub. So at this point we're at the 10 out of 50 action point mark, and we sent 400 truck points northeast towards this direction, right? That's the 20 out of 50 mark. So this is what's happening at the start of the turn, and we can also preview to see what it's expecting to happen at the next turn. And as you recall, not only do we make some changes to our logistical network, but we actually, as of next turn, we're going to have the truck station, level 1, which has more logistical points and more action points. So you can see that reflected here. Another interesting thing about the preview mode is you can actually select which truck station or logistical asset you want to see the logistics for. So this is just in general, but this is for this specific truck station at 4223, which is of course our SHQ. So this is this truck station here, what it's doing. So sometimes you have multiple logistical assets in the same hex, or maybe you got a logistical asset out here, and it kind of combines the numbers. It can be a little bit confusing. So you can actually select your different logistical assets here when you're in preview mode, and it'll kind of break it down. So you can see it's a brighter pink, and that's highlighting the one that it's currently on. Alright, so let's talk about airdrop logistics. So this is basically planes and helicopters dropping off supplies, and this is done via something we call an air bridge. So you see we have this guy here who's out of supply. He's in the blue here. We have this transport helicopter here, so if we click on that, we can go into air bridge mode. So air bridge mode allows us to extend a logistical network out to a particular hex. Now if you're using a plane to do this, you're going to need an airport basically at both ends of this. But if you're using a helicopter, you can kind of do it wherever, as long as you start on the logistical network. So you can see here we're already on our logistical network, and this guy's kind of out here. So what you can do is you can say air bridge, and then you want to right click on the hex that you want to drop off to, obviously within range of your helo. So that's going to put a little letter there. I'll just turn the units off. So you can see there's an A here and an A there. That means there's an air bridge going between this hex and this hex. And these are these are obviously letter coded. So you can have multiple air bridges. If you make another one, it'll be B and then C and so on. The A doesn't mean air bridge. It just means the first air bridge that has been created. So as of next turn, there will be a slight air bridge going between these two hexes, right? So this guy's, as you see, he's cut off from our supply network. He's out of supply. But what we'll do is we'll roll the turn. Now that we set up an air bridge here, we'll see what happens. All right, so here we are in the next turn. If we turn on our operational logistic mode, you can see now, if we hide the units, you can see now there's all these logistical points flowing over here, but there's this one little spot right here with 23 logistical points. So that would be our air bridge at work here. And if we click on our guy, we can see he got everything he asked for. So he's in the green. He requested 5 food and he got 5 food. So that's how air bridges work. They can be pretty handy when your guys are out of supply. You can also transport units this way. It's essentially an extension of your logistical network. So you can actually use this to get troops out of sticky situations or transport units behind enemy lines or whatever you want to do. It essentially operates as a strategic movement, right? So once you've got this air bridge set up, you can click strategic map move, and you can see we can move them around via the air bridge onto our logistical network. Now we can't actually do it in this case because we don't have enough weight, as you can see at the bottom there. We need 275 logistical points, and when we have 23 on the hex, that's just because this helicopter is really not that big. It's not a very good transport. But if we had a bigger helicopter or a large plane or something, we could move this guy through the air via our logistical network. So it's a pretty cool little tool to use. But I think this video has gone on long enough, so I hope you enjoyed the logistics video. I hope it was helpful. Let me know in the comments what you thought, if there's anything else you'd want to know. The next video and the final one in the series is going to be the combat and model design video, so that should be a really good one. But for now, I think that's going to be it for me. So as always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.